Good evening and welcome to Face to Face. For the Newsfirst team, I'm Niresh Eliathambi. Poverty was one of the biggest issues, challenges that faced Sri Lanka in 2022, 2023 and into 2024. And this government was supposed to bring about system changes which would alleviate the poverty, and it has done so. It has brought about a lot of changes, but is it enough to get rid of poverty, to eliminate it, or to bring it down as much as possible? Because our poverty rate today is more than double what it was before the economic crash. Although it has gone down a little bit this year. And to discuss this, I have with me Ms. Swasthika Arulingam, attorney at law and executive committee member of the People's Struggle Alliance. Welcome and good evening, Swasthika.
Good evening, Niresh. It's good to be back.
Yes, you're back on the show after some time.
Quite some time, yes.
Right. And in fact, I think it was about 4 or 5 months ago that you appeared on the show. Now, Swastika, poverty alleviation. Now we know what happened in 2022. All of a sudden, our poverty rate went from a manageable line to 25, 30 or more, right? It was in the 30s as a percentage. And in 2024, it did come down a bit, and now in 2025 it has come down some more. And of course, as we have been told in the last few days, the government's programs have resulted in a lot of the economic indicators, the targets being surpassed. What the IMF wanted done, we've done even better. But does that actually lead to an alleviation of poverty, and how quickly does that happen? So let's talk about the economic growth. The GDP is growing. It's doing better than the IMF thought we would do, better than the World Bank thought we would do. Wonderful. The targets have been passed, but that doesn't automatically lead to a lot of people getting out of poverty, does it?
I think I want to perhaps challenge the basic assumption that institutions like the IMF and World Bank.
You're always challenging assumptions.
No, I think institutions like the IMF and the World Bank, it was not really created thinking of third world countries in mind. It was not created thinking of countries which at that time we were still in a colonial or just out of colonialism. So it was not created for us. It was created for European countries who were coming out of war, and it was entirely looking into the welfare and the survival and the revival of European economies. So I think firstly, the first assumption which I want to challenge is we should stop benchmarking ourselves with the targets which IMF and the World Bank set. And we all know the history of the IMF, what it did in Latin American countries, what it had done in African countries, and now what it's doing in Asian countries. And despite the most popular belief that the IMF, saves us from crisis or so on, there is not a single evidence to show that any country which has followed the IMF program to the dot, not a single evidence to show, has in fact come out of poverty, in fact come out of debt, or in fact come out of a economic or political crisis.
So what you're saying is, in short, we should set our own targets, and those targets may be far greater than what the IMF is telling us. They set targets which are supposed to keep the country above water, basically, and then not allow another crash. But what you're saying is, we Sri Lankans, we have to set our own targets for everything, for jobs, employment, investment, and GDP growth, and indeed poverty alleviation as well.
And also to think about what's happening in this country, right? As you correctly said just a few minutes ago, we are exceeding the expectation of what IMF and the World Bank is expecting. Like just in the first 7 months of 2025, we reached some export target of some $10 billion US, right? But it's almost like a two different, because I'm a trade unionist, so I read all of this in the newspaper. We see the numbers in central bank reports and so on. But when we go to the, let's say, the area surrounding the free trade zone, or when we go to the plantation, people are not just living in poverty, they are living in absolute poverty. Children are not getting enough food, children are going into malnutrition, and there are numbers to support this. And as you very correctly said, nearly 1/4 of the population, or 1/3, I mean, the World Bank director recently said 1/3 of the population.
I think it's at about 24%.
Yes,
the number has gotten better this year.
So still, we are at a very, very low bar when it comes to poverty. And poverty is calculated, like just as we were discussing before the program, poverty is calculated at around $3 per day.
This is the World Bank standard globally, $3 a day. So whatever your currency may be, it's a little over 300. Yes, so it's less than 1,000 rupees a day.
Yes, so that is nothing compared to our cost of living and so on. So even by their own standard, the poverty line which is drawn is extremely low. So we are not even looking at people who are just above the poverty line and what that percentage is and so on. So when you said...
that's a very good point, because there are a lot of people, millions in fact, who are living just above the poverty line. So you may be earning 1,500 rupees a day. So you don't fall into that category of poverty, but it's not like, you're having a great deal of money. You are still subsisting.
So when the NPP government came to power, despite the fact that they are doing certain incremental changes, getting the approval of the IMF for every single, even if they draw a dot, they want to put a dot, they want to get the approval of the IMF. So while they're doing all of that, my issue is people didn't vote for this government for micro changes. They vote for this government for a radical change, because when this government came to power, we were in a horrendous economic condition when it comes to people. I'm not talking about macroeconomic indicators. I'm talking about poverty, the actual visible poverty which we are seeing on the ground. And I don't think the NPP has done enough changes to pull people out of poverty, because we can't, poverty is not something which we can wait for 10 years and let's do this gradually here and there. There has to be a radical transformation in pulling people out of poverty. And as the saying goes, poverty is political, it's not numbers. It's a political decision to keep certain people, 1/4 of the population of this country, or 1/3 in some cases, below poverty line, while the country is showing an export boom. So there is something, that is what I said, we have to challenge this assumption. There is something radically wrong in the way which economists talk about the economy, while they project and when they cheer on and saying that there are these huge booms and there's huge growth. But for people like me, like trade unionists like me, on the one hand we are reading there is growth in the country, but every time we go to the population which is actually bringing that growth, look at the free trade zone workers, look at the plantation workers. These are the workers who are bringing dollars into the country. They are living under poverty line. So there is something radically wrong with the way which we are thinking of the economy, the way we are thinking of growth, and the way we are we are estimating ourselves and saying, cheering us on the back and saying growth is, we are reaching growth targets and so on, but actually people are in poverty. So I think there is something radically wrong with the way we are understanding growth. And that understanding of growth is not something which was designed for third world countries like us. So we need to start thinking for ourselves as to what we mean when we say a country is growing.
Right. So again, what you're saying is set our own targets.
Yes.
Okay. Now, interestingly, just a few hours ago, we got the news that in Argentina, which is another country which went bankrupt, had to approach the IMF yet again,
yes.
And the IMF set certain targets. But the president who took office a couple of years ago, Javier Milei, he pretty much threw the IMF rule book out of the window, and he set much bigger targets for his government, and he slashed government spending left and right, He just reduced the number of cabinet ministers. He said, we don't need a ministry for this, we can't afford a ministry for that. Things like Ministry of Culture, he just said, we can't afford things like that. And he really slashed government spending and opened up to free market economics and so on. And today the news came that he has won a landslide victory in the parliamentary election. He's won both houses, in fact, the Senate and the lower house, and he's got a majority in both. Mind you, earlier he didn't have anything close to a majority. He had perhaps a quarter of the seats in those houses. So clearly something is working there. Should we be looking at countries like that? Right now it's the IMF, it's the World Bank, it's the ADB, it's us. Should we be looking at these other countries? What are they doing? What's working and what's not working?
Whether his policies on extreme austerity will work or not, we will see that in the next few years. I think we have to wait and see. The fact that he won a landslide victory, strange things happen. Gotabaya Rajapaksa won a landslide victory as well.
Yes, but that was for other political reasons. Yes. Now, the Argentine election didn't focus on, that kind of thing. It was basically on the poverty that the people were undergoing.
There are certain criticism of how the elections were held as well, but I won't go into that because these are various opinions which are coming out. So we have to wait and see in terms of the austerity. But if you look at historically, even I go back to the example of what European countries did post World War II, when their economy was in shambles. No one prescribed austerity for them. In fact, their own economists were prescribing government to increase the government spending in order to revive the economy. So for European countries, when they go into an economic downturn, their own economists prescribe government spending because the private sector is not going to spend. So get the government involved, spend more so that the economy will grow. But when you turn around and turn the wheel to third world countries, the right opposite is prescribed for us. We go into an economic downturn, cut down expenses, cut down state expenses and so on. And I think one of the reasons why people also are convinced by this argument is due to the very nature of the state. Take the Sri Lankan state for example. None of us would disagree that our state and our bureaucracy was politicized, was made into party political machinery or machineries which were serving certain parties in power. So every single government which came into power tried to make the state machinery bend to the will of their political party, not even try to bend to the will of the government, but to certain petty political interests. So when this keeps building up, people also start resenting. When you go to a government department and when you don't get services the way you want, and when people are treated as if they don't matter, resentment grows. So I think our political cultures, not only in Sri Lanka, but even in countries like Argentina, political culture, the culture which we have created, which has eroded state, and the fact that we have not allocated enough resource for very vital departments, like for instance, education, has resulted in poor services being provided in the state department, which fuels the anti-state kind of impression which people have against state institutions. Well, so I think one feeds into the other. But overall, what we should see is when you cut down on state services, like for instance education and health and social services. For instance, Sri Lanka is one of the best network of local health care. Midwives come to your house and check up on whether you did cancer checkup. I mean, those days we used to have people coming giving us filaria tablets. So it was that good, our community health structure. So unless you fund it, that's going to fall apart. And we're going to get all kinds of diseases which our country was able to control. So this is something which we have to always keep in mind when we push for austerity. The fact that we have good health indicators, the fact that we have good education indicators, the fact that we had low child mortality rate didn't just come out of nowhere. It was due to consistent and conscious government policy, which organizations like the IMF is trying to undermine right now.
Now, when we speak of austerity and government spending, it's not just about the amount that a government spends. It is on what it spends.
Yes.
Because if you're going to build an expressway and all that money is going back to China or something, that doesn't trickle down to the people. Whereas if you do fund health and education and so on, and everything is in-house in Sri Lanka, then that money is going to circulate around within our society. So I think that's the difference, isn't it?
And also on what we spend on. This year round as well, we have increased military expenditure. And the question which I keep asking is, what war are we fighting for us to keep increasing our military budget? I mean, maybe in 2008 or 2009, when the Sri Lanka state was at war within itself, maybe the government, majoritarian as it may be, had a justice. But now, I mean, what is the justification for keep increasing military expenditure? I mean, what war are we fighting? If a foreign country decides to invade us, with all our military expenditure, we won't survive that. So I think we are allocating money in the wrong places because we are afraid. Every single government which comes to power is afraid of certain status quo power structures. Like, for instance, every single government which comes to power does not want to offend the military elite bureaucracy which exists within the military, in every military. So I think these are some of the things which the government, despite the fact that I always say this, the government is sometimes, it looks as if they're scared of its own shadows, despite the fact that they have two-thirds, despite the fact that they have an executive presidency which they're supposed to abolish and they have not. We have to, as people, as parties outside the parliament, we have to keep pushing for these things, because otherwise we are looking at a militarized state with austerity. And that is a horrendous combination when it comes to a country in poverty.
But now you referred to the military budget, but if you look at the budget of any ministry, one can't just sort of say, oh, there's X amount of rupees being spent on this ministry. It's what that money is being spent on within each ministry, within the departments under that ministry. That's what matters,
Yes,
isn't it?
That's true. Even, for instance, let's say you, under the, I think it's called the Rural Welfare, it's a long title, I think it's called there is a Ministry for Food Security, amongst other things. So they have allocated certain amount of money to look into food security and so on. But we don't know, until the budget speech, of course, we don't know how this money is going to be spent. And food security becomes, I think, the reason I brought up military expenditure is that we are living in a time of poverty. That is what we are discussing, right? So we need to allocate substantial money to revive our food production, which has been run over by consecutive governments. So that there has to be a concerted effort by the government. And where are we going to get the money if you're going to allocate that for military expenditure? So I think it also talks about priorities. Why are we spending on military expenditure when 1/4 of the country is in poverty, and then 1/3 of the country is in starvation mode? Why are we allocating so much money for military? These are questions, I think, which we must, as civil society, as political parties outside the parliament, we must raise these questions.
Right. Now, another aspect is, now we spoke about this $3 per day poverty line, but $3 in Sri Lanka may not buy as much as $3 in India. Different countries have different prices for food and all types of goods. So of course the World Bank may know best about these things, but you really can't say that $3 is $3 everywhere, can you?
I don't think the World Bank knows best. I mean, that has...
I thought you would say that.
I keep, wherever I go, I keep repeating this. I think we are taught to think that the World Bank and the IMF know what they're doing. But I was listening to the World Bank in one of its press conferences. And for me, I'm not an economist. And I don't understand when someone comes and says, you have very high growth rates, but poverty rates are still very high. I cannot understand. And yes, economists come up with these fancy theories explaining why growth rate is high, but why poverty is also high. But then I would like to ask them and say, I always tell them, there's something wrong with the way which we are looking at the economy. If growth rates are high, if we are projecting high growth rates exceeding expectation, and the poverty levels are still high, there is a disconnect between two different worlds in a country. So I think unless we can figure out how to bring the fruits of the growth rate or whatever, the export, the export earning back into the country, back into the people, I think as a country, as an economic model which we are following, we have failed. And the World Bank and the IMF is not going to tell us, because we are following whatever they say to the dot. We are following austerity measures, we are following liberalization principle, we are following financialization principles, we are privatizing state-owned enterprises, even those which are not making loss and which were contributing to the treasury. So we are following IMF to the dot, and still we are recording high poverty rates. So I don't think the IMF or the World Bank has answers. And in fact, they have, if you look at the history of Sri Lanka, they have pretty much, messed up in many areas, including fueling race relation when it comes to, the Sri Lankan population. To give a good example, the Mahavali scheme was in fact promoted by the World Bank at one point. And it was with the support of the World Bank that Ms. Jaya Jayawardena went and used that. Of course, I mean, World Bank is not at fault for our own interracial politics and so on. But it was the World Bank which was backing this colonization project, which ultimately resulted in farmers who are already living in the north and the east being displaced and then, the rest. So policies like this, which World Bank has no idea about race tensions on the ground, or doesn't even care. What they think is, few hundred people living here, 1,000 people living here, okay, let's move the 1,000 people here, or let's move 500 of them here. They don't understand the very fragile race fabric which exists in countries like Sri Lanka, thanks to colonialism. But they don't think about those things because they don't care. For them, we are just numbers, and they have to just arrange us and then think it's going to work out.
But then it's up to us, isn't it? Because they are giving the money, but it's up to us to use it wisely and not sort of use it in a manner which is detrimental to ourselves. So when I say us, it's the political leaders and all of us in society.
I don't think, for instance, to take this current IMF agreement, I don't think the IMF gave us much choice. To give an example, the IMF was...
But did we give ourselves much choice? Because we waited until past midnight, basically, past the 11th hour, to go to the IMF. So by the time we went to the IMF, we didn't have money to buy petrol. The oil tankers were coming to the port of Colombo, and after a few days they would sail away, because simply we didn't have the money. The government didn't have dollars to buy that oil. I mean, we had basically messed ourselves up to that extent. So typically governments go to the IMF a couple of years before such a problem happens. I mean, Pakistan went to the IMF long before this kind of thing happened to them, right? They were in a worse situation, but they had enough money to buy fuel. So the country kept on running. So it's basically that, my view of it is we should have gone much sooner because we were mishandling our own economy. I mean, we shouldn't have mishandled it in the first place, but that's a whole different argument.
I agree with you to the extent that I think that we don't rein in so much on our business elites. I mean, in all countries, actually, in many countries which follow the free market economy.
When you say business elites, it's business politico elites, isn't it? That's
yes.
Tied up.
When you allow a few companies to amass infinite amount of wealth, in this country also we have companies like that. So they have that amount of money to channel it back to controlling politics in this country. So to give an example, a few years ago, trade unions got together and raised the alarm bell on the amount of money which was being misinvoiced and transfer priced out of the country. We even raised it with the central bank. In fact, Danusha Gehan Patirana was the first, one of the first few economists to strongly raise this issue of how much money is going out of the country. And that was one of the reasons which we went into the economic crisis. So when you give that amount of power to a group, to a few families in this country who are running very successful businesses. In India also we have this problem, but now I'm noticing in Sri Lanka also we have this problem. They're able to control and corrupt politics in a way which no one else is going to do. So when you say we also this is also a part, we also there to be blamed. Of course we are also there to be blamed. We need political leaders to take strong political decisions, unpopular political decisions, but strong ones, and we have not done that. But I always say this, right? Yes, we are to blame. But if you look at the history of the IMF and Sri Lanka, this is not the first IMF agreement we have gone into. I think we have gone into like 15 or 16 other IMF agreements.
I think it's more, isn't it? It's 18, I think.
So we have.
Who's
so the
counting?
Large part,
We've been going to them
exactly.
for the last 50 or 60 years.
Yeah. So for the large part of our post-independence history, we have been under IMF conditionalities, and we have not come out of crisis. So if yes,
well, we've been placing ourselves under them.
Placing ourselves under that, and
because
they are not
of
coming
our
free
wrong
money.
policies.
No, but that is true. But they're also not coming and just giving us free money. So if we have to take 50% of a blame, I think the IMF also, I mean, if you want to say the IMF is the god of all answers, then we have to give the IMF also. We came to you, you said conditionalities, we followed your conditionalities.
But are our governments using the IMF as an excuse instead of taking the responsibility ourselves? Now, the last President Ranil Wickremesinghe, just kept on referring to the IMF.
I definitely think that's true.
Was it his excuse?
No, I definitely think it's true that our political leaders hide behind the IMF to do certain things which they think, because they also think it's correct. Like even Mr. Anura Kumara Dissanayake thinks that you have to privatize a large number of state-owned entities. So they also think this is the way to go forward, because they can't imagine a different economy. Once they come to power, they want to stay in power, and what's the easiest way to stay in power is to follow the status quo model of the economy. So they also think the IMF is right. So it's not just these IMF is dictating and they're just following it. They also think the IMF is right, and the more and more they stay in power, the more they think that. So I do believe that. I do agree with you on that. But my contention with the IMF is, for instance, this time around, the IMF is not only looking at taming us on our fiscal policy or whatever, they're also looking at governance. Sri Lanka is one of the first countries which they are looking into a governance model. So when essentially a loan lending entity, with conditionalities of course, but a loan lending entity now comes and says, we're also going to look at how you're governing, I think that is just crossing the limit. Because it's basically like if a bank which I have taken a loan from comes and tells me it's not only about you returning the loan, but I'm also going to look at how you're living your life, who you're going to marry, how you choose your partner. It's almost like that.
Now I agree with you in a certain way, Swasthika.
No, so I just want to finish and say that when the IMF takes a country which is on its knees and says, we are going to dictate how you're going to govern your population, I think, that just has crossed the limit of where a loan lending entity stops at influencing a country's political path. So that is a very dangerous, moment where the IMF is now dictating how we govern ourselves, and that is, I think, undemocratic.
Now, again, I sort of agree with you. But when the IMF came out with its diagnostic, I read it from cover to cover several times, and I felt absolutely ashamed, because everything that they have said we should do are things that we should have said we should do. We didn't need the IMF or anyone outside this country to tell us this, but we didn't do it, we didn't practice it, and perhaps fortunately, to save face a little bit, our own civil society had done its own diagnostic, which came out a few weeks or months before the IMF's, and that pretty much was similar to the IMF. So the thinking was on the same line. But yes, what you're saying is, why do foreigners need to come and tell us this? But the sad fact is, we messed it up, didn't we?
I think. I don't want to take the risk, because if we just say everyone else is, doing this to us and we are just, looking at the sky and waiting for everything to fall, I mean, I don't agree with that. I think we ought to exercise agency.
Yes.
And the reason why governments don't do that is they think if we just go along with what is imposed on us, then other countries won't come and topple our government. I mean, there's all these phobias which exist. I mean, if we go against the IMF, then, we'll go into this, the US is going to come and, there are all these fears. I don't know. I'm not in government, so I don't know how much of it is true. But ultimately, when people give a government a mandate, and a government a mandate like this government, executive presidency and a two-third majority in parliament, we need to at least know that yes, maybe the government can't immediately come out of the IMF, but at least is going in a path where you go to a point where you have economic sovereignty. And I don't think this government is doing that. And also even other things, even like really low hanging fruits, and that's the worry with this government, right? It's not so much that they're not setting everything right. I mean, they can't do that. They're a new government, you need time and so on. My concern is the policy direction in which they are taking. To give a very, very, very simple example, part of the government, in their government manifesto, they have said they're going to decriminalize LGBTQI relations. It's a government which has two-third majority in parliament. It can just do it in the blink of an eye. Why isn't the government doing it? So even little things like that. Corporal punishment, they said, they are going to abolish it, and suddenly everyone is up in arms, so now they don't want to do it.
Well, not everyone.
Sorry, not
certain people.
Certain groups of people, certain very regressive groups of people up in arms, and now the government is backtracking. PTA, when the government was in opposition, they say, we don't need PTA, we need to, and I was also of the position, members of parliament, we all agreed and we said we should fight against it. Now they're taking the exact position which Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe took. So this is exactly why people don't trust even, progressive parties, because when they're in the opposition, they say so much, and when they come to power, they don't even exercise a fraction of what they say when they're in the opposition. So I honestly don't know. I mean, I don't want to say IMF is all bad and we are power and we can't do anything, because that would completely take away our agency. But what I want to say also is that the people who come to power also believe that the IMF's prescription is the correct prescription. As long as you believe that, then I don't think we're going to come out of the IMF trap.
Right. So now let's get back to the key issue of poverty alleviation. And you very eloquently noted that yes, we are doing well according to all these indicators, except perhaps the poverty indicator. So can I flip this on its head? And I'm not an economist, and you of course
I'm also not an economist.
But are we looking at the wrong indicator? Because it's nice when you're growing like India, right? And they're saying they're growing at 7%, 8%. Some states are even above 10%. They can be proud of that. But when you are at rock bottom, as we were in 2022, should we be looking at the other indicators such as employment, such as poverty level itself? So should we be saying, okay, our poverty indicator has gone from 25 to 24, but should we be setting a target for that rather than setting the target for the GDP growth? I mean, of course, we should have a target for GDP growth, but are we looking at the wrong indicator?
To put that into a very very obvious example is the situation of the plantation economy, right? Plantation companies consistently have reported massive profits. I mean, there are research done on how these profits are made and so on. I'm not going to get to that, but they have consistently reported high profits, and our country's economy rely on that. But 2-3 days ago, I was in one area where rubber plantation workers live, and they said that their houses, and the company has to do this, right? Because people are sold with the land like slaves. That's how we have plantation workers in this country. They're sold with the land. They don't have any right to the land. They can live in the land for 200 years and still they don't have ownership to the land. The houses have not been repaired for over 30 years, and these are like small line houses, not repaired for 30 years. When the rain comes, people can't live inside the house because rain just pours into the house. So it's not even a house to protect them from any elements of this earth. And the reason I talk about plantation workers is that if they don't exist, if plantation workers don't exist, we don't have a plantation economy. Every single dollar which we bring into the country is due to plantation workers. And after decades of having this plantation economy, this is their living condition. They're living in houses which are not even fit for anyone to live. I mean, they're living in sheds. I mean, today also I saw a newspaper article where they're like, plantation workers are living in tents because government has given them a landslide warning. So this is what I come back to our original discussion, is that you have a plantation economy which seems to be making profits, and despite their crying and whining of all the planters, they seem to be making profits. And if the profits are falling and if the production is falling, it's not due to the problem of the plantation workers. If they are not maintaining the plantation, if they are not bringing in new technology, if they are trapping people inside plantation as part of the land, which is essentially what they are doing to the plant. For 200 years, plantation workers are objects of production fixed to that land. The companies literally own them, because they can't do anything with their lives without the permission of the company. They don't have a hospital without the permission of the company. They don't even have a graveyard.
Well, within that community, of course.
Yes, within that. They don't even have a graveyard to bury their dead. In some plantation, they have to bury their dead in the plantation, so that even after they die, their bodies become the nutrients for the next batch of. So that is how badly we have exploited these people in a sector without which our country's economy would not have survived this far. And I can say the same thing about free trade zone workers also. So I go back to my original point. We talk about growth. We say on this year, the country has this amount of growth. We are getting better. We are stabilizing. In 2022, we had a bad situation. But when I was speaking to some of the plantation workers, they said, in Colombo, people were getting, this Aragali and so on. But for us, even in 2022, our lives didn't much. I mean, of course, it got a little worse. But, this has been our life all along. I mean, we didn't have any issues with food, because we have the manioka, then we have the jack tree, and that's how we eat anyway. So for me, it's kind of like living in two different worlds as a trade unionist. On the one hand, the people we represent, the lives are not improving. But on the other hand, the news which we are reading is telling us that our country is improving. So as you very correctly said, we need to look at a radically different model of social and economic indicators, and people have already done. People like Amartya Sen has proposed different social indicators to look into economic growth. Indian economists have provided various indicators look into economic growth. So there are people who have looked into this and studied this and said, just sticking to GDP and measuring our growth is not, the country is not growing. People will continue to be in poverty if you're going to just stick to the GDP. We need to start looking at other social indicators and measuring our growth based on those social indicators.
Right, and we're almost out of time. My final question is related to the cost of living. Because as we spoke about earlier, $3 a day will buy you different things in different countries. In Sri Lanka, the cost of living is very high, and it is artificially high due to a lot of reasons. Cost of production, then you have various mafias which control, the vegetable mafia, the rice mafia, and all kinds of mafias. And then cost of transportation, cost of energy, the CEB, the power sector is also run by a mafia, and so on. And on top of that, you have the government taxation, which adds to the cost. So shouldn't we be re-examining these costs? Because just as much as you'd like to earn more money, people like to earn more money, fine, but perhaps there are methods to bring the cost down, which we're not looking at yet.
As I've said before, the fact that people are in poverty is a political choice. It's not a matter of numbers. It's a political choice to have that amount of people in poverty. Take, for example, the rice mafia. When this government was in the opposition, they were talking about the middlemen, how the prices go up because of the fact that the middle rice millers jack up the prices. But when this president came to power, he cowed down to this is the executive president, right? This is the executive president who can, who has literally has, as they said, the only thing the executive president can't do is to change a man to a woman and a woman to a man. I mean, there was this very famous saying. So this executive president could not withstand the political pressure which the rice millers were putting on him. So my issue is, if you want change, and this is what I said before, if you want change, you need to be able to confront whether it be the political elite, whether it's the business elite, you need to be able to have the political will to confront. If you're going to be afraid of them, if you're going to say, if we confront the millers, the rice millers, then they're going to, there's going to be a political upheaval, and then we won't have enough rice in the country. All I'm saying is, you are increasing the military budget. You have military at your disposal. Why aren't you using the military to ensure that rice production is there? This is the exact thing where you call in the military for essential services. If someone is coming and blocking rice circulation for their own political, for their own, for their own private gain, this is exactly where the executive president can step in. And the fact that the executive presidency has never stepped in to avert such a crisis is also why we say we don't need an executive president in this country, because the executive presidency, in the history of the executive presidency, has never stepped in to avert a crisis on behalf of the people. The executive presidency has always strengthened the arm of the state to oppress people, but it has never stepped in to avert crisis on behalf of the people. So I'm not in for military intervention and so on. But for me, if someone is preventing rice circulation in this country so that they can make millions in profits, then for me that is a national crisis, because food is the staple food of this rice is the staple food of this country, and if a few families, a few men are preventing the circulation of that food, for me that is a national crisis. And the way the president handled that national crisis is I think a good indicator of where this government is going in terms of its politics on poverty alleviation.
So you think there should be firmer, more radical reform?
I think people voted for a radical reform, and that is precisely why they leave out the executive presidency. I have a lot of criticism on that, but that is precisely why they gave a 2/3 majority in parliament. People gave a 2/3 majority not for lukewarm changes. They not to clean Sri Lanka. That is, clean Sri Lanka, yes, anti-corruption and so on is fine, but take for example some of the cleaning projects they did. Municipal council workers are anyway doing that. So, you don't have to, do a tamasha out of cleaning the city, when what you ought to do is to pay municipal council workers better, give them gloves, give them sanitary protection, which municipal council workers don't have. So, instead of making a spectacle out of things which anyway, people are doing, hardworking people are doing, what I want the government to do is to take the country towards a radical reform where you can alleviate poverty, where the fruits of this spectacular growth which we are having is shared by everyone in this country, which is what the constitution wants the government to do. I'm not saying anything out of the blue. The liberal constitution of this country says a government's job is to ensure the fruits of the growth are shared amongst the people of this country. And that is what we want this government to do. And that is what this government is not doing, because it does not have the political will to do that.
Right, and I'm afraid we are out of time. My thanks to Swasthika Arulingam, attorney at law and executive committee member of the People's Struggle Alliance. Thank you for being with me this evening, Swasthika.
Thank you, Nilesh.
And thank you to you at home for watching. And don't go away, because the news is coming up next. Have a great evening.